Befitting that we have with us architect Dikshu Kukreja of the CP Kukreja Architects to please come on stage. Can we have a round of applause to also welcome architect Dikshu Kukreja to spearhead this interesting fireside chat with Mr. Patrik Schumacher.
Patrik, first of all, I think we should really give him another applause for some fantastic work that we've seen ZHA is doing. Wonderful. So, from Shanghai, or China rather, on the east, to so much that we saw on the west that you are doing, we happen to be sitting here in the middle. And it makes me wonder, what's the future for us in terms of how our cities are going to be shaped? So I think it would be interesting to see that from the global perspective that you are engaged in at the moment, how things are shaping up when we look at it from an angle of sustainability. Because really, I happen to be coming from a city which is now having the nickname of being a gas chamber. And actually, it's now a waterless dry chamber. Delhi is a city where we literally can't breathe anymore. And as statistics at least say that by 2020, which is a few months from now, we'll probably be running out of water. So if that is the situation, and I think Mumbai has its own share of issues, and 39 other cities in India, which are over 1 million population, have similar issues, or at least they are racing towards the same kind of issues. It would be interesting to know that from a global perspective, where are our cities really, what's the future for our cities?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I believe that we are still in the era of urban concentration. And we see this everywhere, and I don't think there's any point to fight that, because it's in the cities where we need these integrated, intricate labor markets, the job opportunities, the cultural opportunities, the self-development opportunities, and we actually see that the cities don't keep up. They don't provide the supply opportunities. They have old planning regimes. They have constrictions which don't allow this to happen. And I know this in London. London wants to be and is the fastest growing city in Europe for very good reasons, but we're having so many supply restrictions, actually quite low density. And it could densify much more massively, but we have a political system where the different boroughs are freezing out those new entrants and prices skyrocket, and then people have tough choices. They have to either stay in the provincial place or go to the outskirts, and that means they're losing lifetime energy in commutes, in lacking the connections, the events, the participation. So I've done a study called Walkable London, and a series of densification project, which isn't about tabula rasa. It's about, like in Shanghai, this project. I've done a study in London with housing estates where you can double usage with inserts in these vast in-between spaces onto firewalls. We need to also challenge at the same time the unit sizes. They're kind of the very, very ancient standards which don't match the contemporary living, where people are living much more outdoors, where they use Starbucks, use restaurants, cafes, university libraries, and they don't need much more than a small pad. And we have a backlog of planning applications with this new concept of co-living. And I showed glimpses of that. So if we develop where the units are literally a quarter of what the standard is, and wherever that's broke through, this is really making for good living connected with free co-working. It's all about networking. The startup culture is very exciting. So for me, there's a lot of political barriers. And I've been making a study where I'm showing if you throw out major lines in London and make them into pedestrian lines, I mean, the pollution is also atrocious in London. We didn't know that all these buses on diesel, all the taxis on diesel. I think all this has to stop. And if I'm walking only in London, and you can really go far from Islington to the office, to the AA, to the Royal Academy, all this central thing. This is a several mile radius. I'm deep into my 50s. I walk this. It keeps me fit, keeps me healthy. But I want the buses and taxis out of the way because they hamper me. I'm slowed down. And in London, you have the canal or you have the waterfront on the South Bank. You see how massively quick you could cross town if you didn't have all these obstacles. Of course, you need this massive, beautiful underground system pumping through. You need the train system to bring people in, but from there you should walk. Plus maybe all these scooters and skateboards and electric bicycles, they're filling the streets of London. Again, the politicians preventing that to take off. That's my model. I don't think we can spread out. So I just wanted to wrap up the pitch for urban densification based on walkability as not a leisure activity, but as a major throughput. Because if you look at a street channel, the amount you could push through via pedestrians and maybe bicycles, and in London you see in the morning kind of bicycle avalanches like you used to see in China in the 1980s when early 90s when I first came to China. That would be the pitch, plus of course major underground systems. I don't know how this plays in climates like here, but again, you have an infrastructure in London now where nearly most offices have showers for their cyclists, so you could also have showers for the walkers and joggers.
So, in fact, Patrik, we happened to be at Harvard in different roles 25 years ago, and I remember Zaha was there also at that time. So there's always been this debate about densification and whether cities should really be the centers of where everything kind of comes together, or they should be more sort of a balanced approach in terms of development spread across. So, for example, cities like Delhi, Mumbai, and all, which are really, really huge and have all these problems related to what I was talking about, basic quality of living. They could very well be that philosophy or school of thought which has been there, that why do you need to bring all activities within the city? For example, education, higher learning, universities could be pulled away, or other industries could be pulled away, and things like that. So there has been this debate. But even if we talk about densified cities, and you're talking about London where there's still potential to increase the density, the question is still that we need to somewhere, and there are so many architects and planners and designers sitting in this hall together. I think the question has come where the time has come where we need to realize that really we don't have a choice going forward in terms of sustainability being just a luxury. So one sees these kind of massive works happening in China and Saudi Arabia, and then of course you see some kind of a very responsible development happening in Scandinavia. But I'm here thinking and concerned very much about India. Which direction are we going to go from here? We had liberalization back almost 30 years ago, and I don't know how much we can pride ourselves here. We've progressed. There's no doubt we've progressed. We all need to be very, very proud of that. But have we really responsibly progressed? Or has that progress been more about looking mostly at the West? And I'm talking about our clients, about our institutions, about our governments, looking at another model and trying to replicate that model here. So is there a missed opportunity? And even if there is or isn't, going forward, when our cities are gasping for air and running out of water, and the rest of the problems that we see, crumbling infrastructure, buildings falling apart, whether it's in Mumbai or Kolkata or any other city, how do we can densify, but with densification, what is that other level of responsible planning?
Well, I mean, you can make the comparisons on the infrastructure, this kind of suburbanization which we saw in the US and which is now being reversed has a much higher ecological footprint. All the kind of highways you have to roll out, all the networks and sewage and water networks and infrastructure networks, you have to run around out miles to capture a few houses. That's very inefficient. We also talk about an urban decentralization. So there are now a new set of water management plans which nearly become like greenhouses, oases in the city, rather than having everything centralized. I believe in this. And when you say universities could be located outside, I'm somebody who is teaching, I'm going to the A a lot. I want this to be in walking distance from my office, from Arab who are coming to join, but also the different schools, Westminster, Bartlett, the AA, they're in one cluster and they're in the city. And the next door is a big bookshop. I mean, the Bartlett is trying to create this East London campus. I mean, this is a government initiative to bring people out to Stratford, kind of, art to the east, etc. Nobody wants to go there and sit out there. And this is inside London on a kind of underground level, but they want to be at the Bartlett where they can walk across to the AA and back. And the same I find in all these university towns around New York, Princeton, New Haven, UPenn, Philadelphia. I would say 90% of the staff live in New York. They live in Manhattan, and there's a reason for this. And the tech sector has this kind of, and the Chinese get it wrong. The Chinese want to have these kind of tech cities spread in the landscape. We're working with them to make them cluster. But they're looking at California, which is the wrong model. This kind of spread out, these were factories of Silicon Valley. They're sitting there historically, but they want to sit in San Francisco, but the San Francisco doesn't let them. They want to sit in Manhattan, that's where they will grow. The campus, Google campus in Manhattan, in London, that's where they want to be. Hollywood, they actually want to be in the Brooklyn. So I believe in that, densification. But then there's the question, if we can't avoid that, if that's the challenge, let's work on this challenge. And that's what we're trying to do with these kind of layered spaces where you have green on multiple levels, where you have, you densify it so much that it becomes walkable in large stretches. Industry can stay outside. Sure. I mean, that will be anyway. Robotic systems, server farms, logistics centers, they outside. But but everything else, which is human interaction, needs to cluster. I don't know if it has to be 50 million cities. There are already 20 million cities, quite a few. In Europe, we don't have those yet. We have London will be the first, which will hit 10 million in a few years. But I think London can be 3 times as dense, easily.
No, so I agree. I mean, this is, like I said, it's a debate, and certainly densification has lots of logical points going for it, no doubt. But again, when we were discussing, you and me, about reshaping future cities, the other thing that comes interestingly to mind is about the political narrative when we look at it, because really how our society behaves or opinions are formed has a lot to do with the kind of lifestyle and living environment or built environment we end up creating. And that built environment many times tends to be dictated, not many times, at least I would say most of the times, is dictated by the political narrative that is there. Now, I wonder sometimes, and again, this is something maybe it might seem far-fetched, but no harm dreaming, that is there a future ahead for designers, for planners, for architects, that we could end up setting the narrative for the way cities are formed? Because I'll give you an example here. For example, Mumbai has had its share of political circus in the last few weeks, but finally, there's a government here, whatever sort of a medley or cocktail it might be. But one hears of things like mega projects which set the way cities will develop in India. For example, there is this project about a bullet train which is linking Ahmedabad to Mumbai. and then suddenly we hear in the press with the new political powers that the project will be scrapped. And similarly, there is a development here coming up in Mumbai which has to do with what you're talking about, urban transport, the metro, and there's a metro yard to come up in RA, I think that area is, and which is already underway, some of the pre-construction work there, and I believe now that project will be scrapped. So when things like this happen in a democracy, what is it really doing to our citizens is something I wonder. And therefore, I feel, is there a narrative that we architects can set going forward?
Well, I've stuck my neck out in talking about much more private initiatives and space and freedom for private initiatives. Because what I'm looking at, when I look at planners and I look at the political process, it's incredibly conservative. It is always the safest bet to reject proposals, to not do things, to stop things, because you're not, stepping on so many feet, and it's a safer bet. But I think it's a problem, and I believe in entrepreneurship, and I believe in initiatives which come from industry, from developers, from landowners, and I believe urban planning should be private urban planning from stakeholder groups. And it is very difficult to entrust this process to, let's say, members of parliament who face a public which is less well-informed, subject to forms of demagoguery nearly. I mean, I've seen that around the world. I've seen that even in London, when I look at the members of parliament and the local councillors, and they see the irrationality of preventing major assets in their neighborhoods because it's safer to reject them. And we have so many projects ourselves as well in the face of a housing and affordability crisis, major supply being held up. And the city is not allowed to flourish. The exception is the City of London, the financial center, and it's the world financial center. The dynamism is unbelievable. The churning, the build-up, the intensity, the quality, even with historical asset mixed in. And that's because of the special politics of the City of London, which isn't based on populism, residents, electorates, but it's based on the stakeholders, on the firms themselves. It's an ancient medieval guild-based political system where you have the freemen and the different professions delegating their delegates, and because also it's not residential, and they were understood that long time ago. And it's a shame they don't have residences, because if you allow a residence in with the contemporary climate of politicizing and protesting about everything and anything, this piece of urban super infrastructure, it's the heart and beating heart of the UK, would also be shut down. So I'm saying keep the politicians out. That's what we have to, that's the narrative I'm pushing.
So that's what I wonder here, that, with our cities like this example of Mumbai, and then in Delhi we are facing issues of suddenly before the elections that are coming up, there is talk about regularizing not one or two, but close to 1,800 colonies across the city of Delhi. These colonies suddenly, from being completely unplanned and illegal or unauthorized, whatever is the appropriate word, are suddenly being considered at par. And the social reason given for it is that don't the people living there need basic infrastructure, whether it's road or sewer lines or water supply or electricity? Of course they do. But I think we need to now start looking at this idea that if we need to look at a new shape for a future for our cities, that is there a role that the design community, that the professionals can play somewhere? I know there was recently the example in Bangalore where professionals came together and stopped that elevated road. And in Mumbai also, so many of friends are sitting here, but I know that architects here, have strong design convictions. But can those convictions move from spaces like this or conferences to actually starting to dictate how our cities are going to develop? Otherwise, we are only going to end up always playing the catch-up infrastructure. Problems of water, problems of other infrastructure, electricity, roads, or what have you, and we keep building that. Or we sway with the politics of democracy, and suddenly something is happening one day and stops the other day. Now, I think there needs to be, in times to come, more community participation. That community, because it's really whatever we as architects are doing is eventually for the community. And therefore, involving the community maybe is the answer in these kind of large public projects.
But we also, when there's talk about community, there's a lot of kind of demagogy in there as well. This group here is community. The cities we love and adore, for instance, of the 19th century, they didn't have the strong state. They had a kind of community, but it was a community of the leaders,
Okay.
of institutions, of businesses, landowners. They are the ones who created the civic leaders, is the community keep it reliant. They need to be empowered, and they should not be blocked by politicians who are basing themselves on a kind of dispersed and lesser kind of stakeholder group which has actually the knack, the knowledge, the resources. That's what we're relying on. So I think there's a kind of, and that's maybe a provocative thing to say, but that's what I believe in. And I see the initiatives in London. There are actually things like the landowner associations.
Right, right.
The stakeholders, they do the collective action amongst themselves, and that's the best for the end user. Because the end user who's voting for 3 layers every 4 years for somebody they don't know, a counselor who feels empowered to block things, he is not able, there's no feedback for him to deliver. Actually, the people who are owning the assets and having to create value with assets are creating city value for end users, for everybody. They should be entrusted and empowered to do that, and that's what I'm pleading for, and that's will be the best for everybody, for the demos who then are voting with their feet, with their purse, with their where they participate, rather than voting on a ballot box, which is kind of there's no feedback, it doesn't lead anywhere. That's my view. So the community is the community of movers and shakers who are actually put their neck out and their resources out, and who gain resources from everybody, investments, and are trusted with these resources. And they have checked multiple times through marketing, through the banks who put their money down, through the experts they can gather, through the competitive bidding for land. These are the people which I call the relevant community, which needs to be empowered.
So I think it would be interesting if we were to actually study some of the models that are happening like this, the kind of model you're talking about. And even as architects, it would be interesting for us not just to go beyond our realm of just looking at buildings, but maybe from whether it's our institutions, whether it's our council, etc., we can actually form interest groups and start looking at these kind of models. I mean, if I
want to say, for instance, in London, there's so many great projects. All of them generate pedestrian public space. But there's an ideology which is kind of criticizing because it's privately owned and managed. But these are the successful places. And these are places which before were infrastructure places, leftover places. So also when it comes to delivering of public realm, I believe in private initiatives. They're faster, better, and there's diversity of offerings. So that's why I've been pushing. And it's a different kind of, it's collective action.
That's what,
but it's not through the usual political channels, which are too slow and not direct enough. They don't have proper feedback mechanism, and they're inherently in the game of prevention rather than initiation and push through.
So yeah, I think it would be interesting since we have, we'll be closing up soon now, Patrick, but if anyone has any observations or a thought they want to share, go ahead, please. Pooja? Yeah. Just a second here.
Why are we obsessed with the idea of a beautiful city rather than a livable city? You know, we architects are in the business of
Absolutely,
aesthetics.
you're right, yeah.
Since we are in the business of aesthetics, we want everything to look good, you know, even people to look good. So given a way, we would want to design even people who are going to be habiting that place. Because you gave the example of Delhi and 1800 colonies being regularized. The whole idea is correct. You know, we want a community which is smart community, as Patrick is saying, something which is, you know, people are thought leaders or something like that. But urbanization will always have a shadow which will be of service providers and everybody. They have to live in the same society, in the same city. And that's why the cities need to be more livable so that they are provided with all the infrastructure and amenities and everything and integrated into the social fabric rather than have a beautiful city, you know, which is looking good and you have nice communities, smart communities.
I think you're absolutely right. That's when I say that we need to look at architecture and planning more responsibly. I think the time of beautiful, it's too cosmetic. Today, development has to be responsible, and the responsible way, I would agree with you at least, that it's about livability of cities. That's more important. You're right. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, I mean, the aesthetic values, we always navigate the spaces by an intuition, what we feel stimulated by, what we feel attracted by. And I think the aesthetic values have shifted. It's not the kind of minimalist, pristine emptiness which we aspire to, but a kind of collage and of an intense woven urban fabric with a lot of activation and activity. That's what we intuitively feel attracted to. So I don't think we can dismiss. It's a new form of beauty, a new kind of aesthetic, which we're trying to express in our work as well. So I don't think we can, as architects, as designers, even as end users, dismiss, let's say, a kind of intuitive aesthetic navigation of the world. And we need to speak to this. And for me, the design is as much a communication of the offering, making transparent, making legible, and making appealing of an urban offering than it is the sheer objective placement of things.
So we can do that outside of London also, not necessarily in the central district of London. So if the objective is to give quality life, similar smart communities can be based outside. You know, we start with differing economies. You know, we go for a land which is much more cheaper. It doesn't have, it's bereft of any kind of social infrastructure. And then we want to build smart communities. There obviously they will start as a squalor. So what we need to do as designers is right from the beginning, give those smart communities, first have the commute, have the economies of some kind of amusement, malls, shopping, offices. Then I think they can. They will work
you might be. I dispute that you should or could, with equal value, deliver these things outside in the green fields. Just look at the center of London. Beyond the first layer, you have these kind of fields of two-story terrace houses. Why shouldn't they be built up at least to the level of a Georgian 4- or 5-story urbanity? That's planning, and there's interesting concepts coming out of the kind of libertarian political arena I'm participating in, where you say, give each of these the owners on the streets, they collectively decide how much they want to build up their street. So they all participate in that uplift. And you would then also bring in more facilities. There's an enormous untapped potential which is locked up. So I dispute what you're saying, and I think that because of the political difficulty of central London, there are still people going out to the outskirts because they can't afford the risk of waiting 3 years for planning or the risk of, then they go outside. But this outside investment, I think, is suboptimal. It is a highly compromised
But Patrick,
investment.
that's what so I qualified that earlier by saying this is a debate on this matter. So, and I remember 25 years ago, again, at Harvard, there was this debate when, at the time I'm talking about, we were there, about neo-urbanism and Alex Krieger and all of them with that philosophy, Elizabeth Duerk. So those things will go on, but I think livability is very important. And the other thing we need to realize is that, you know, when these targets are set, for example, housing for all. Now, it makes a lot of sense to have housing for all, but when it becomes sheer numbers, and then we talk about Fordism and post-Fordism, it's strange that if we start regressing back towards Fordism, because when we are saying we need to build these affordable homes, it's not about the livability or the quality of what homes are being done. It's only sheer numbers, and whether it's being done in Kerala or Kashmir or Guwahati, it's about literally like 70 years ago, CPW did it. We have situations where it's a stamp that is being made. So the same kind of design all over. So I think that's where the question of livability is something we need to see. We might build up homes for such a big population, but what's the quality of those communities around those homes that we are building, and of course the quality of the home itself. But anyways, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question.
Want to throw some light on this comment you made regarding the new government in Maharashtra reviewing these two older projects. Both those projects, one is the bullet train as well as the metro system, are actually examples of irresponsibly planned government trying to just push through some bureaucratic old school thoughts. You know, whether Bombay needs a bullet train is not necessarily the question as much as the fact of the way it has been planned and what they were actually going to, the way they were going to execute it, which was something that actually the community, including a lot of architects, had been questioning this over the last 5 years, but were never given a chance to actually, you know, have a say in anything. The same thing with the Mumbai Metro service. I mean, you know, they're making, it's absurd that they're making this whole thing overground in the majority part of Bombay with no thought to how it will ever be expanded in future or how it could be interconnected, because it's all occupying existing narrow congested streets. So there's been a clamor over the last 5 years of saying that this is badly planned.
Right.
Nobody's saying we don't want a metro, but it means, so it's a good thing for actually the city that the new government is willing to actually maybe listen to.
No, I think it's fantastic, and that's what I'm saying, that as architects and planners, I think we need to carve out a new role, perhaps for us, because just, you know, limiting ourselves to that lot of land or that building is not anymore the role we should relegate ourselves to. That's my thought. And if we want our cities to be livable, then we need to somewhere intervene and play that kind of a role. So, otherwise, it's just a direction that comes and things are happening.
No, so therefore, taking on what Patrik did mention, that it is, I think, imperative for architects, planners, to actually get more into the public domain, to be more visible, to make, you know, be able to be seen and heard across the board. I mean, if there's
Absolutely,
you know, and it really is. I mean, we have to stop trying to hide in the shadows, you know, waiting for patrons to pick us and therefore, you know, make us fight versus each other. I mean, it's, you know, we've got to, you know, be out there and start, because we have to inform the community so that they can make the right decisions, rather than the wrong guys, you know, influencing the community to say, oh, you know, because he's trying to keep his own chair. So
I agree completely.
Yeah.
I agree completely. Prashant, you had something?
Yeah. So I have a question for Patrik. He mentioned about that this is the future in terms of the architectural work that they have been doing. So my question is this the future for iconic architecture, or you think this can become a holistic development, the style of working that you are doing for what Dikshu just mentioned about, you know, housing for all or for a mass? That's exactly my question.
Yes, I think this is not meant to be confined to iconic spaces. If you do a public building that generates a bit more of a iconicity, if you like, justifiably so, but this is not what I believe Hermeticism is about. It's about a generalizable, universalizable new methodology, which is all about weaving that network more densely, and that means each component has to also have more openness to contingent connections. There's continuities between spaces, and there's this capacity of embedding and fitting, like an organic weave, like a jungle nearly. So that's the idea here, that at the moment these buildings look more unusual and stand out is because they're coming in first. If you remember the early modernist buildings, they looked like kind of spaceships from another planet landing in historical kind of conditions. Even in the 50s, the Seagram's building for Mies van der Rohe in the kind of stone Manhattan. But Manhattan changed in the image of this building. And I foresee the same fate to our buildings. This would be a methodology of mass participation and a generalized new way of working, which I hope could happen. And I do also believe that we have mass housing, but there will not be the Fordist suburban sleeping cities. There will be clusters integrated in the urban centers with much more social spaces interwoven with much more, maybe quite a bit smaller individual units, but with more shared spaces. And you have also mechanisms less owned, more rented temporarily, like you have in these co-working and co-living spaces, where you also have full utilization through Airbnb and so on. And I think the market should allow to discover and develop these. And it's difficult for politicians to be relied on being quickly enough regulating these, because this is a discovery process. The market is a competitive discovery process where we can find out what the right mixes are, what the sizes are, what the product is. So the message here is very clear, and I have other projects which are more in the kind of that co-living, co-working domain. It should be generalizable. Right now, these things stand out. We also, they're more expensive still, but downstream, if you're thinking about prefabrication, robotic adaptation of components, the surcharge for the more adaptive and individualized, tailored solutions will be very, very minimal, and you suddenly gain economy, because on two sides. On the cost side, you gain economy because we can optimize and minimize structure, facade. If we have parametric validation of and optimization, but also on the benefit side, you get much more out of your 20 square meter patch because it's networked up with all these resources. You can get a 60 square meter out in the suburbs, but your life is not enhanced. And materially, it's more expensive. The energy consumption is more. So my plea is very clear. This is really meant to be an invitation for everybody to participate, to work in this fashion, rather than keep working in ways which we know by rule book, by standards, and these standards are inefficient.
So I think we could go on with our conversation, but maybe we should. Do we have time? Yeah. Sure.
I think if we talk about the livability of a city, we should learn from our legacy and the changing
Absolutely.
scenario and
just
the
going to say
political, scenario. So I think for a livable city, it requires the fertilizer of the local participants and the cultivation of the civic responsibility. So I think both the aspects should be integrated and we cannot disintegrate both the stuff. At the same time, we architects, planners, and the designers have got a very important role to act as a bridge, between two. So we have to be, in connect with the local aspect of that particular city, and politically also need to be connected. So I think.
No, I mean, you literally read my thoughts, because that's what I was just going to say, that when we think about what shape our city should take in the future, I think, I remember this big hoo-ha 15 years ago that Mumbai will become the new Shanghai. Of course, not much has happened, I think. But why does it have to become another Shanghai? Why can't we export the Mumbais out to the world? And by that, I really mean it's not just, semantics, but I really mean that India, when we go abroad, we talk about it, and we know that it's such a complex and diverse society. And our architecture, our living styles vary from one state to another to another. So why can't we actually imbibe that into our cities? And needless to say, we're going back in civilization. We have given to the world the way cities are developed, whether it's Indus Valley, Harappan, or whatever else, or universities like Nalanda, etc. So it is a bit of a disappointment sometimes to see that we just want to look towards the west, or now start perhaps looking towards the east of what we need to do. While I think there's enough legacy, enough examples, case studies, and enough talent actually to be able to pull that off. So I really feel that, and I wish that in times to come, we can change the shape of our cities and the future of our cities, and we change it our way, the way we deserve to have it, rather than import it. Of course, I agree with Patrik that architecture, public architecture, Prashant, what Patrick's been showing as well, public architecture deserves to be iconic also, deserves to be aesthetically beautiful as well. I mean, why shouldn't our eyes feast for the best, but not at the cost of? And at the moment, what is happening in India, at least I can speak for, we are developing, but at the cost of really responsible development.
I just want to conclude by saying, yes, I mean, I know many Indian architects. I've visited some studios. I have a lot of ex-students working here, and I will look again at the panels outside. So I think it's an incredible density of talent, superb talent. And I foresee also out of this architectural culture, you can globalize outward. I think we're living in a world society with global architectural culture, and the different places are unique, but also learn from each other because we're all living in a kind of contemporary world civilization. And I see it's an enormous amount of talent, and I'm very happy to be here and communicate with guys, collaborate with and join that venture here in India. That's why I'm coming here. I want to be part of that urbanization, of that upgrading of this, and participate in building the cities, building the architecture with all you guys.
So in conclusion, I would also say that while you come from further away, but for me, it's always inspiring to come to Mumbai because I have a lot of architect friends and a lot of you sitting here, but I also feel because many years back, I worked here for an architect, Uttam Jain, in my college days, and I feel that the way the camaraderie and the collective thinking that exists in Mumbai in the design fraternity is something, at least if I speak for Delhi, we have a lot to learn from you guys. So thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, sir. But if I can just hold both of you for just a minute, I believe there's a gentleman who's been holding a mic for a very long time. We'll just take his question as the last question. Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Wojciech Strans. I'm a co-founder of Concept by So. To kind of wrap up, I wanted to ask these kind of a twofold question. In the first part, I'm going to take you back a little bit to the future, to the past, if you will, and ask you. And this is really an inspiration of Rem Koolhaas's SM, L, and XL. There's a passage there, which is a comic kind of part, which kind of details his experience going through the Byzantium project in 1991 in Amsterdam when they converted a plant into what is now a residential, very commercial development. And he describes how he, battled through the mayor's approach to sync up 5 architects and developers, and they're all different visions of that. What are sort of your, if you will, your kind of key takeaways? I'm still sure that you're facing that from the other side, be it the government, the developers, the investors, to kind of drive that, vision that you might have for the space that that is, the design arena for you. And the second part, which would draw on to the future, which I think permeates in the room as well, is that there's roughly 550 million square feet of office portfolio in India. Interestingly, that's the size of Manhattan, so there's quite a lot of potential, but there are limitations, what with cities expanding widthways and the infrastructure not handling it. With all your global experience, some of the key points that an architect or the design industry should really focus on to kind of make that kind of impact, I would say, and make it livable. We've seen beautiful presentations of the urban realm or the public realm intertwining with the commercial spaces. There's co-working, co-living. Some of the points, if you would comment on that, I would really appreciate it.
Well, we rely on entrepreneurs, developers. They're the ones who have to develop the intuition for a site to utilize the synergy potentials of each location with respect to unique product and program mix they want to place to make the most of the site. I just have a general sense. I cannot talk to the particulars usually, rely on the entrepreneur, but we can then give ideas about how to spatialize it, to three-dimensionalize it, to make these connections visible. Because when a developer comes into an urban site, he's going to this location because of all the neighborhood relationships. And he's bringing the new ingredients because they connect up and make the most of these locational relationships. And then I come up and want to cluster them internal to the project, but also external, and make that through visual affiliations, and to have a virtuoso capacity to make that three-dimensional puzzle. That's what I bring in. But what I rely on is very much the entrepreneurial spirit. And those are the guys who have been around the world and in different quarters and studying where to locate. They need to be relied on. And I trust them more than some kind of politicians who have preconceived notions or an old land use plan from 30 years ago. That's where the barrier is. And we're also very happy to collaborate with multiple architects. So larger projects, I believe in a kind of co-authored, co-evolved, multi-author urban districts. And again, that requires a kind of spirit of agile synergies between designers, and we can do that in the design process also successively. So we need to be much more open in our and versatile and quick-footed. That's why we these parametric tools and also the kind of simulation tools and digital design tools. We turn around sometimes over a weekend. We rerun this a composition with different room sizes, with different ingredients. We switch from hotel to residential to office. And that's the kind of new skill level we have. And then the project might also change and adapt through its life process. That's the new condition. So I'm very, very happy to work with the complexity of urban sites, with the complexity of programs, with entrepreneurial ventures, but also with community participation. So we also have these events where you get feedback. But they shouldn't become kind of token events. They should be guided and led by the developer.